By the summer of 1862, Dakota families were on the verge of starvation. They had been waiting for months for food promised to them in government treaties. Tensions exploded on August 16, 1862, when Dakota leaders confronted Lower Sioux agency trader Andrew Merrick, demanding the food that they had been promised. Merrick reportedly said that they should eat grass if they are hungry. Furious Dakota warriors attacked the agencies, towns, and settlers in the region. Merrick was one of the first to be killed, and his mouth was stuffed with grass. The violence lasted more than a month. About 500 settlers and 80 soldiers were killed. Many Dakota were also killed, and hundreds died in the aftermath. Hundreds more were rounded up and incarcerated at Fort Snelling, where at least 130 died, most of them children. All treaties were voided, and the Dakota people were exiled from the state. After a trial, 38 Dakota men were hanged in Mankato on December 26, 1862, the largest mass execution in U.S. history. In the summer of 1862, a bloody war broke out in southern Minnesota. Dakota families were on the verge of starvation. They had been waiting for months for food promised them in government treaties. The tensions finally exploded on August 16, 1862, when Dakota leaders confronted Lower Sioux agency trader Andrew Merrick, demanding the food that they had been promised. Merrick reportedly said that they should eat grass if they are hungry. Well, this infuriated the Dakota warriors, and they attacked agencies, towns, and settlers in the region. Merrick was one of the first to be killed, and his mouth was stuffed with grass. This violence lasted well over a month. There were about 500 settlers and 80 soldiers killed. Many Dakota were also killed, and hundreds died in the aftermath. Hundreds more were rounded up and incarcerated at Fort Snelling, where at least 130 died, most of them children. All the treaties were voided, and the Dakota people were exiled from the state. In November 1862, the trials of the Dakota held at Camp Release began. Of the 498 trials held, more than 300 men were sentenced to death for crimes ranging from rape to murder. The defendants were not allowed legal representation, and the trials themselves were brief, with some lasting less than 5 minutes. President Abraham Lincoln personally reviewed the convictions of the Dakota men. Proponents and opponents of execution alike lobbied Lincoln on behalf of the settlers and the Dakota. In the end, Lincoln commuted all but 39 sentences, deciding only the Dakota involved in civilian massacres should be executed. On December 26, 1862, 38 Dakota men were hung in Mankato, an event which remains the largest single execution in American history. The men who had received a commuted sentence were sent to Camp McClellan in Iowa, where they would remain interned for 4 years. Another nearly 1,600 Dakota women, children, and elderly were held during the winter of 1862 and 3. They were held at Pike Island and were near Fort Snelling. Disease quickly spread, killing hundreds in the camp. In April 1863, Minnesota would void its treaties with the Dakota and sent those living in the camps to Nebraska. Soon after, Congress passed legislation making it illegal for the Dakota to live in Minnesota. It remains a law to this day. To ensure Dakota were totally driven from Minnesota, a bounty was created, awarding money for every Dakota scalp turned in. Little Crow, who had led the first raids, was killed and his scalp collected for bounty. His skull was kept as a memento until 1971. The last Dakota executions took place in 1865. Hello, Tom from History Delights here, along with my friend Kevin. Say hello, Kevin.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, we're in Remembrance Park, Reconciliation Park here in Mankato, Minnesota. It's Blue Earth County, and this is a site that in 1862 there were 38 members of the Dakota Sioux executed by hanging. It was the largest mass execution in our nation's history. This all culminated because of the Sioux War that was taking on in 1862. So while the United States was engaged in a civil war with the Confederacy, they were also fighting the Sioux here in southern Minnesota. There's a lot of history on why the Sioux went to war, but there were crooked land agents, and they were getting a very raw deal, and they just decided to go to war, killed a lot of settlers here in southern Minnesota. This is also kind of tied into back in 1857 in the Spirit Lake Massacre. I mean, these are all just a culmination of events. It looks like here behind me is the names of those that were executed on that day. We also have a sculpture of the buffalo, which you know was a main staple of the Native Americans out here on the prairie. They've constructed or painted a mural on the wall back behind us. And if we look across the street, Kevin, maybe you can get a shot there. There's a sculpture of the Winter Warrior. And so Kevin and I are going to be visiting in and around Mankato, and actually headed up to Fort Ridgely later on to complete this story. When we're ready, are we rolling?
Yeah.
We're very fortunate, Kevin and I. We came across Madrid here, that's also here in the Reconciliation Park, and he agreed to talk to us here just a few minutes about his family history and what this park kind of means to him. So Madrid, would you mind telling us and repeating what you just told Kevin and I about your family history?
Well, as far as family goes, my bloodline's traced back to Dakota, who was a war chief and what you call a son of rebellion or an outlaw or renegade. But in those times, it was one of those necessary things to stand up for yourself and your people. And that's one side of my line that I come from.
So if I may just interject, I spoke earlier about the whole Indian War here, and this all being tied in with the Spirit Lake Massacre, and it was Inkpaduta that led that tribe on the Spirit Lake Massacre. So you're saying you have bloodlines that go up to Inkpaduta, okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, that's fine. And to understand and know that you come from that background is way more than anything you can be taught or told, because more of our oral history is passed down from our mother to our grandmother to our great-grandmother and all the way down. And to say that, to rebel against, let's just say it, tyranny or whatever you got to call it, the bad roughhousers, it was in a way in a lot of ways of being important, being necessary about it. And as far as these 38 warriors that were hung and killed, some of them that my mother had, some of the letters that she had to interpret for a historian had ended up saying that some of these warriors that were hung were wrongfully convicted and wrongfully hung because in some of those letters they say, I wasn't even involved in this. I was over here in this and this, and these are some of the last letters that the priests or the fathers or friars or pastors, the ones that could both speak partial Native American or Sioux, Dakota, however you slice that, and English. So there's a lot of translation that we're kind of misinformed.
So your mother actually got to translate some of the letters that were written from these condemned men back to their families and such, and so your mother played a role in interpreting those.
Yes. My mother is Phyllis Roberts, but her maiden name is Red Day.
Okay.
One of her grandmothers is Josephine Big Top. And Red Day, along with Sioux boys, trace back to, like I said, to Inkpaduta, but not only just them, other small band chiefs like Chief Red Iron, Cloudman, who else was there? Yeah, the brother. Anyways, it's just different to be here to understand that people were hung wrongfully, you know.
Right.
Some of the letters, it was basically saying that they wanted to convict somebody and get their
pound of flesh. They wanted revenge, is what they wanted.
That's
right?
What they really wanted most, more than anything. And some of those letters would say that, but they don't bring those forward.
Right. Well, I think this is important, and I thank you so much. Kevin and I thank you so much. This is the type of history that needs to be recorded. You don't read about this in the history books.
Oh,
And as we are building the story on the Spirit Lake Massacre, we're trying to tell both sides of the story, because I can, from my interpretation of the events, there was no absolute right and wrong on either side. There was bad motivations on both sides, and we need to reconcile that, which is the name of this park, reconciliation. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talking to us today. What a wonderful story.
Thank you.
Thank you.